I noticed nobody stole my stopwatch again. I've kept a stopwatch for 25 years and nobody has ever stolen a stopwatch. It's good to see everybody this evening. I appreciate the invitation to come back again this evening, and I appreciate each one of y'all being here. I know it's an unusual time we live in, and it's a little bit more difficult to get out and do things right now than it used to be. And so we've got that working against you. I appreciate all those of you who are on Facebook and Zoom. For somebody who is still back in Mayberry, it's an unusual thing. We got a text, I think, last night from somebody in Africa who was delighted that it was on Facebook. And so I don't think he could speak English. He was just delighted to see. No, he really can. He's very good at that, by the way. But I appreciate y'all doing this. I appreciate the opportunity to come and to present this lesson. I hope it will be one that will be uplifting and encouraging. I know last night there were certain parts that by design are not as uplifting because we're talking about the different things people fear. Hopefully tonight, while we're going to talk about some of the problems of fear, we're going to get to the point where we can see the solutions, and the solutions are powerful. God is powerful. I appreciate Mark, the songs that he led this evening. I appreciate also the way he was able to enunciate Brother Bloodworth. I've never been able to do that. And neither has your preacher ever been able to do that. As a matter of fact, even when he writes to me, he doesn't get Brother Bloodworth correct. And so, and I can understand. When I was a real estate appraiser, I was our company's name was Valuation Services, and we were supposed to. My dad ran the company. Obviously, I worked with him, and I was supposed to answer Rick Bloodworth, or Valuation Services, Rick Bloodworth speaking, and that's how it would always come out. And so finally, I just would pick up the phone and say, "This is Rick. Feel free to introduce me as Rick from now on. It's a whole lot easier." Speaking of Bloodworth, I realize it's an unusual name. We had some kids coming up on Halloween this last time. By the way, Happy is a great place to go trick-or-treating. People think with the name Happy, it's going to be a friendly place. It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And especially the preacher's house, for some reason, they think will be safe. But I had one little boy come up, and he said, "Where is the Bloodworth?" and I said, "I'm the Bloodworth." And ooh. But apparently what his parents had said, "We're going to the Bloodworths," and he just could only imagine some kind of a ghoul, and he wasn't disappointed. So I was happy for that. Fear is such it's a difficult topic to discuss for several reasons. One, it's kind of like talking about money. Sometimes all you have to do is mention money and people's minds just go off in 40,000 directions. And when you talk about fear, it's the same thing. And when you start talking about specific fears, people really do start thinking, oh, and you get to where it distracts you. Fear can paralyze us if we're not careful. And yet, if we understand fear and if we understand whom we are to fear, then we can get on with the business of life. I think Carolyn got a text from somebody today. I don't know who it was that was telling us that the election had gone in a way that we weren't really rooting for, and it generated all sorts of thoughts, as far as what might happen and all. But I kept coming back to this idea when we talk about Scripture and when we talk about the truths within the Bible. We're not talking about something that is to be left within the pages of the Bible as theory. It's useful. It's workable in our lives. Either we can trust God and we can use his promises and rely on his promises fully, or what are we doing? To take a bit here and a bit there, but to not take it all doesn't make any sense. Everybody's got their favorite recipe. If you just took a little bit of this and a little bit of that, excuse me, it wouldn't work, would it? And the same thing with the Bible. When we talk about the things on fear, we really have to realize that God is going to help us if we will do it his way. The first passage we want to look at tonight is found in Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 25. It says, "Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe." Think about that for a moment. Think about how many times you have been wanting to do something, and yet you're afraid somebody was going to tease you, or somebody was going to get after you, or somebody was going to punish you, or beat you up, or gossip about you, or fire you, or whatever it was. Fear of man will prove to be a snare. If you're always afraid of what a man can do to you, you're not going to function properly. I think everybody knows who Babe Ruth is. Babe Ruth was not necessarily the most intellectual of people, but he was one of the nicest people that I suppose ever played the game of baseball. And he had really simple and basic philosophies. And he said something that I think if we could kind of take to heart, it would help us. It was, and again, it's very basic. He said, never let your fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. And well, when you think of Babe Ruth, what do you think about? You think about his home runs. Matter of fact, Babe Ruth, when he died, he still held the home run record. He also held another record. And baseball fans know what the other record, as a matter of fact, he held a lot of records, but baseball fans know what the bad records were too. And one of them was when he died, I believe he still held the all-time record for striking out. But nobody believes or remembers Babe Ruth as the strikeout king. They remember Babe Ruth as the home run king. Even though a few people have actually surpassed him, in a lot of people's mind, he's still home run king. Never let your fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. You might hear certain news on certain days, and it may just really set you back. It may make you so angry that you can't function, or it may make you so nervous or so frightened that you just, I don't know what we're going to do. And the answer is what we looked at last night, trust God. What we looked at when David said, when I'm afraid, I'll trust in you. And then he said, I will not be afraid. And it sounds like an odd thing to say, when I'm afraid, and then to end with, I will not be afraid, but he put the trust of God in between that. When we'll do that, then we don't have to be afraid. And it's an important thing because we have important work to do for God. We have to seek and save the lost. Let me rephrase that. We get to seek and save the lost. It's a great honor. Can you imagine having a better day than going out, seeing somebody that's drowning and rescue them? Maybe a small child, and you bring them back to their parents, and they're so grateful to you, and you just think, well, I'm so glad I learned to swim. I at least dog paddle because I was able to save somebody. Oh, now think about what it would be like to be able to contribute to the salvation of somebody's soul. God will save the person, and Christ will save the person. But we have our part to do, and our part is to seek and save the lost. And when we do that, we're going to accomplish the task God has put us here for. But if we fear man, the snare, the trap that it's going to be is it will keep us from being effective for God. And you think about how tragic it would be if you had an opportunity to save a small child from drowning and didn't do it. Well, think about how tragic it would be if you fell into the trap of the fear of men and stopped your service to God. So this is a critical. I love the song, by the way, that Mark led before we began this. Before the events of the song that we looked at tonight, we found Jesus in the garden praying. And you remember what he prayed. Please let this cup pass from me. He did not want to die at that time in that way. We don't know why. It may have been because he desired to be with his apostles. Maybe he just wasn't ready to leave this world. Maybe he still wanted to be able to heal those who were sick and to be able to seek and save the lost. Who knows why Christ asked for the cup to pass from him at that moment. But he said, not my will, but thine be done. And he went back and he prayed that prayer 2 more times, 3 total times. Please let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine. And so when God answered this prayer, he gave Jesus exactly what he requested. For the cup to pass if it was his will, but it wasn't his will. His will was this was the time to become the perfect sacrifice, and he did. And he went willingly to the cross without fear. When we think about things like the guy getting elected that we maybe were not hoping to be elected, maybe you were, I don't know, I won't get involved with your personal preferences. Or when we think about some of the financial things that people are going through right now, when we think about some of the difficult, hateful things that are going on right now, where people are just not treating each other well, or whatever it is that you think about and think, well, this is really serious. What are we going to do? When we realize that God is in charge and we have the attitude, not my will, but thine be done, then we can go on with confidence. You remember what the man said when Jesus and Peter and James and John came back from the transfiguration, and they came back and there was a group of people arguing. And Jesus said, what are you arguing about? And a man came up to him and he told him that he had a son who was ill, and his disciples tried to heal him, but he couldn't do it. And do you remember what Jesus said? When the man said, if it's possible, please do something for my son, Jesus said, if it's possible, all things are possible for him who believes. And this man said one of the most human things that I think we have in the Bible. I do believe, help me in my unbelief. We do trust in God, but we still have a little bit of fear. Help me in my fear. We do our part, and then God will take care of everything else. But if we don't even try, if we give up, if we think things are hopeless, if we permit fear to allow us to abandon hope, what will we do? Isn't it true? When you boil life down to the essence of it, we are planning on going to heaven anyway. When somebody says, well, you might die from this disease. I don't want to die from this disease, but I'm planning on going to heaven anyway. There might be civil conflict. Well, I don't want civil conflict, but I'm planning on going to heaven anyway. There might be really difficult times. I don't want really difficult times. I like my comfort, but I'm planning on going to heaven anyway. And it's what we were talking about last night. It's not through arrogance that we say that. It is through a trust of God. God has said, if you will do this, I will do this. We don't have to worry about God's part, just our part. And so this allows us not to fear and not to be caught up in all the things that people want us to get caught up in. Look at all the difficulty that's created by fear. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 13, who is going to harm you if you're eager to do good? This is an important principle. If you're next door neighbors to somebody and you're a good neighbor, generally speaking, they're going to really like you. Now, there's a fact that there are just some evil people in this world. You can't get around that. There's some unreasonable people. But generally speaking, who's going to harm you if you're eager to do good? The better you do, the more people are going to like you. And when we talk about good, we're not talking about what they think is good, but what God defines as good. But then he says this, even if you should suffer for doing what's right, you're blessed. It's an acknowledgement that there will be times, because sin is sin and sin has a penalty, that you will suffer for doing good. You might be continuing to be faithful in your worship. You might be continuing to be faithful in seeking and saving the lost and trying to go to your neighbor and encourage them to become a Christian. You might be trying to do a lot of things, and you may suffer because of that. Doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not saying it's what we prefer, but it doesn't matter. Even if you should suffer for doing what's right, you're blessed. When we talk about being blessed, we are talking about favor from God. Can you think of anything you would rather have than favor from God? Our salvation comes as a result of favor from God. Jesus died on the cross as a result of favor from God and the love of Christ. And so when he says you're blessed, that's what we're talking about. Even if you should suffer for doing what's right, you're blessed. And then he says this, do not fear what they fear. Do not be frightened. The first thing that we want to really get in our mind is there is, in fact, a suffering sometimes that comes about even when you're doing right because of the wicked. But you're still expected to do what's right. So do right. The second thing we want to look at tonight, as far as problems created by fear, is this idea of being afraid of what men will do to us if we don't yield to them when it comes to our service to God. This is a state that understands that. I was looking at something just the other day about a couple several years ago. They started the lawsuits against them because they would not make a cake for somebody that proclaimed the virtues of a sinful lifestyle. So we'll make any other kind of cake you want. We're not going to refuse to serve you, but we cannot do something that's contrary to our faith. And they were taken through the ringer. They were nearly bankrupted as a result of that. You know that there will be time where people will try to scare you into doing the wrong thing, and most of the time, most people will yield to that fear and they will do the wrong thing. Christians cannot do that. Acts chapter 4 and verse 18. They called them in again, the Sanhedrin's calling in Peter and John. And they commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. What would you do if that was a command? It could be. I honestly didn't think we could ever see a time in our lifetime that something like that would happen. Maybe way, way later in the future, but not now. Could be coming. What would you do? Peter and John replied, judge for yourselves whether it's right in God's sight to obey you rather than God. Now, at an earlier meeting with this same group, they just said, we must obey God rather than men. This is one of the principles of life that if we can get down, we can avoid this problem created by fear of man. And that is when you can serve God and men, do it. When you can be in compliance with God and men, do it. But if you can only be in compliance with one, the only thing that is acceptable for you, the only thing that you will not answer for in a negative fashion at judgment is to do God's will. And that's what they tell them. Here is a group of people. They're supposed to be religious. They're the leaders of the Jews. And yet they're saying, we told you not to talk in this man's name. And they just said, judge for yourself whether we should obey God or men. It's an obvious principle. Do we get that obvious principle? In verse 20, for we cannot help but speaking what we've seen or heard. After further threats, they let him go. If we can make sure that we do not yield to our fears of what men may do to us, we're going to be successful for God. By the way, when you think about the apostles, I think John may have died of old age in exile. We're not really sure. But there's not many of them that can say that. Most of them went to a terrible death, but a glorious eternity. If you and I can refuse to yield to the fear of other people in a kind way, they didn't call them names, did they? They just said, judge for yourselves what's right. They did not give them railing accusations or curse them or anything like that. They just said, this is what we must do, and you can figure out for yourself whether it's right or not, but this is what we're going to do. One of the most serious problems created by fear is a lack of love. And this to me is one of the greatest tragedies of fear, and is one that most people do not associate with fear. Most people would never dream that by being afraid that it's showing a lack of love to God. But look at what John said, 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. When we fear, we interfere. When we fear, we interfere with the love of God. That didn't sound right the first time I said it. It didn't sound right the second time I said it, but you know what I mean. We get in the way of God's love. Remember what Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey what I command. A lot of times people will not obey what Christ has commanded because they're afraid of the ramifications for what evil men will do to them. You don't have to worry about that. You may suffer in different ways, but God will take care of you in the end. We cannot get past the fact that many Christians in the New Testament times were persecuted and killed in some of the most horrific ways. Nor can we get over the fact that many people, even this year, 4 years, every single year, are killed in different areas of the world, sometimes in very terrible ways, for no other reason than that they're serving God. But we have to determine in advance, am I going to serve God no matter what? Or am I going to serve God out of convenience? If it's out of convenience, then you're eventually going to become captive to fear, and that is going to interfere with the love of God. The next thing we want to look at is the fact that fear diminishes your faith, or can if you allow it to. John chapter 12 and verse 42. At the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved praise from men more than praise from God. Think about the different things that we go through. The teaching of immorality today is rampant. And people will be more than willing to share their opinion, which they believe is the only truth worth believing, that sexual immorality is good. And if you don't accept it as good, and if you dare to call it immorality, then you're going to suffer a penalty for it. Are you willing to suffer a penalty for it? Are you willing to say, I just don't agree with that? Don't hate you. But let me ask you this. When people try and promote a certain type of a sin, and a Christian remains silent, or even worse, kind of encourages it by saying, you're right, the love of God is powerful enough to take care of this. What are you doing? Are you not paving the path to hell for them by saying that something God has said, this will destroy you, will bless you? If you say it's going to bless them, even though God said it's going to cause you to be lost, you're paving the path to hell for that. You'll answer for that. But so often, because we are afraid of what men will say and what men will think of us, we won't even confess our faith because of fear. And so what have we looked at? Fear interferes with our hope. Fear interferes with our faith. Fear interferes with our love. What is it 1 Corinthians 13 says? These three remain: faith, hope, and love. What will you do without faith, hope, and love? Because if you yield to your fears, you're going to do without faith, hope, and love. These are the problems that fear creates. And so we have to do our very best to make sure that we don't get involved with them. Marcus Aurelius, he was a famous Roman guy, for those of you who haven't gotten that far in your history yet. But Marcus Aurelius was really kind of an incredible person as you study him. And he said this: it is not death that a man should fear. He should fear never beginning to live. There are so many people that are scared to death of death that they are willing to do anything. They are willing to cower. They are willing to punish other people. They are willing to do anything. And again, don't get me wrong. There are certain things that your prudence will cause you to take different precautions than other people's prudence will cause them to take. I'm not talking about a difference of opinion of this is the best thing for me in this situation. This is the best thing for my family in this situation. But it better be a prayerful, this is the best thing for me in this situation, the best thing for my family, when we talk about the precautions we make. But again, just because you want to make sure you don't get sick or impoverished or in danger does not make you a fearful person. But many people who get caught up in all this are, and they're scared to death. I remember one person came to Happy not too terribly long ago, and they were wearing a mask, and which was great, no problem with that. But I hadn't seen them for a long time, and I was going up to give them a hug, and they had fear in their eyes. They backed up like I had a knife, and you could just see the fear. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't, and so that was fine. But the odd thing is, they went home and just within a day or two found out that they had COVID-19. It didn't matter how afraid they were about it. They still ended up getting it. There are some things that no matter how much you don't want to go through it, sometimes you just go through it. As Carolyn and I found out after having COVID-19 and getting well from COVID-19, it's a very freeing thing. We don't worry about who's going to do cough on us. Or as a matter of fact, now if somebody coughs on us, we think, oh, I hope it's COVID and not the flu, because I'm immune to one, but not the other. But these are the things. It's not death that man should fear. He should fear never beginning to live. Be prudent by all means and respect other people's caution, even if it's more caution than you think is needed. But having said that, do not be living in cowering fear that God is not going to take care of you. I think I brought this up a year and a half ago when I was here. I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken for 5 years as a cook and as an assistant manager, which is a glorified dishwasher, but it sounds better. I think it pays $0.25 extra an hour or something like that. But when I worked there, what I did as a cook, and I know this will come as an epiphany to some, is I cooked chicken. I never went in thinking, oh, I hope I got enough chicken to cook today. Why? Because I was employed to cook chicken. The people who were paying my salary wanted to make sure that I was there so I could cook chicken so that they could sell chicken, and they made money that way. And so they made sure I had all the chicken I needed. I never had to worry about that. You're a servant of God. God will use you in that service for as long as he sees fit, whether it's long or short. And it's not up to us to determine which is better as far as which we will accept. We'll accept whatever God has for us. Now, I just turned 60 this year. I'm hoping that I'm about halfway through with life, and in another 60 years, I'll get to go home and meet my reward. I want to be able to see my grandkids grow up. I want to teach them important things that I know my daughters and daughters-in-law will not teach them, like how to spit off of a bridge and things like that. I want to be there for them, and I want to be there for my kids. And I do think, by the way, that this nation is about to go through some very difficult times, and I want to be there for them to help them get through the difficult times, just like my parents and Carolyn's parents were there for us when we were going through difficult times. But if God should choose to take me home tonight, not because I deserve it, because I know what I deserve, but because I was planning on going to heaven anyway, if I have to go early, I'm happy. Or paradise, or exactly what it is that God has prepared for us right after this death, between death and judgment. I have to admit, I've read and studied for years and years, and I'm not sure exactly, but I know it's going to be good. And I'm looking forward to it. And I won't feel cheated. And as much as I love my family, because they're faithful, if they're as faithful as they appear to be, if any of them go home earlier than I would choose, well, I'll miss them and I will grieve them. We were planning on them, and they are planning on going to heaven anyway. What are you afraid of? What are you so afraid of that will keep you from living? When Marcus Aurelius said, it's not death men should fear, it's never beginning to live, that's such a true statement, but it's no truer for anybody than it is for Christians. We need to live for Christ. Remember what Paul said? For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He was in prison when he wrote that, but he was essentially saying life is really good living for Christ. And it's going to be even better if I go home tonight. Once we have that in mind, once we get rid of this fear of terrible things happening and of death and of everything in between, that's when you start having a freedom to live life. And then life becomes really good. We will still make a lot of mistakes. Some of those mistakes will be sinful mistakes that we need to take care of. We need to repent of. If we're not a Christian, we need to become a Christian, have our sins washed away. But you'll make a million mistakes in life. You just take care of them in God's way and go on living for God. He has not called you to be perfect. He has called you to be holy. And he takes care of the holy part if you will do your part. It's not death men should fear. It's never beginning to live. Luke chapter 12 and verse 4, Jesus said this, I tell you, my friends, isn't it neat the way Jesus talks? I tell you, my friends, here's the Son of God, and he's addressing people, and he says, my friends, have you had people in your life that you just really love, and for them to call you your friend, What an honor that is. To have Jesus call you friend. I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after that can do no more. I'll show you whom you should be, or excuse me, I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who after killing the body has the power to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. It's talking about God, isn't he? And it's going back to this theme of this lesson. If you will fear God, you don't have to fear anything else. But if you don't fear God, then you are going to be subject to fearing just about everything and everybody. And so Jesus takes care of this really quick. Even if somebody's threatening you with death, you don't have to fear them. It's God you fear. And it's a holy fear. It's not just the terror, although we should have that sense of fear about God, knowing that if I sin and I disrespect the cross, and if I treat as an unholy thing the blood of Christ, and if I reject his grace, then I need to fear him from a terror standpoint, because the penalty for that is hell. And God has made hell an apt punishment for those who would reject the sacrifice of his son and who would reject his grace. But for those who will accept it, he says, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are numbered. Don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows. And so now we see that the fear of God is also going to involve that love that we have for him because he loves us, that respect that we have. If you've had a good parent, you know what a proper fear of a parent is. Can they punish you? Yes, so you don't do what's wrong. But, you have a respect for them. You have a love for them. Honor them. If we will do this with God, then understand this. He takes care of the birds of the air. He'll take care of you. He so loved you that he gave his only begotten son. So what do you have to fear? And again, once we understand the length that God has gone to show us and to make sure that we can be saved, then it takes away a lot of the noise. And I realize some of the noise is difficult. The noise of today is difficult, is it not? I will tell you this, when it comes to what we have been doing in America with the shedding of innocent blood through abortion, I think there are a lot of people who just look at that and say, we don't want to talk about that. Well, let me tell you who else didn't want to talk about that. Cain. You remember what God said to Cain? The blood of your brother calls to me from the ground. Do you remember what God said to the Israelites? He said, blood, the shedding of innocent blood pollutes the land. Do you remember what he said in 2 Kings 24? When Jerusalem was being destroyed, when the siege was so bad that the parents were literally eating the bodies of their children because they had come to this state of wickedness. Do you remember what he said? Surely these things happened because the sins of Manasseh, the sins that he had caused the people to commit, even the shedding of innocent blood, which the Lord was unwilling to forgive. You think of the thousands of child sacrifices they had. The shedding of innocent blood. If Abel's blood called from the ground, imagine what the blood of these babies did. And it just said God was unwilling to forgive or pardon, is what some of your versions will say. It was, this has to be paid for. Maybe that's what we're about to go through. I don't know. I do know that we cannot just be accepting things such as the shedding of innocent blood and expect God to continue to bless us. Why would he? He uses punishment to bring us back so that we can be saved. But he loves these children. And he's not going to stand for it forever. There could be a day of reckoning. And if the day of reckoning is coming, then so be it. What will we do? Will we cower in fear? Will we look at everyone as our slave master, or will we live a life for God without fear, seeking and saving the lost, not giving people any improper disrespect, nor giving people any improper respect, but serving God. We could be, don't forget, the God that raised up Pharaoh, who enslaved the Israelites, used that for his glory so that more people could be saved in the end than would have been saved otherwise. Don't forget that God raised up Nebuchadnezzar and used him as a terrible punishment for the people of Judah, so that in the end, more people could be saved than would have otherwise been saved. And if we go through difficult times in life, rather than just whining and cringing and complaining and saying, woe is me, wouldn't it be better to be looking at it from God's lens and thinking, if this is God's will, if this means that more people will be saved in the end than would have been otherwise, then we're willing to go through it. It's not something that we prefer. Even Jesus wanted the cup to pass from him. And it was far more serious than anything that you and I may go through. Can we not go through that with a fear of God and a love for our neighbors and a love for our families so that we can serve him correctly? Or will we allow our fear to rob us of what we need to be doing? Edmund Burke talked about that. No power so effectively robs the mind of all of its powers of acting and reasoning as fear. If you've ever seen anybody terrified, you know that. All of us who've had little kids or have been little kids at one time, which is probably most of us, can remember a bad dream or a bad dog or a bad bully or whatever it was terrifying us or our kids. And when you're a parent and you see the terror in that kid's eye, you want to take care of it. The reason is because fear will paralyze you from doing things. And it paralyzes adults just as well. There's a lot of adults who would otherwise be good Christians if it weren't for the fact that they are incapacitated by fear of men rather than aided by the fear of God. And because of that, they're not able to accomplish the things they need. No power so effectively robs the mind of all of its powers in acting and reasoning as fear. I think we're seeing that. The sons of Korah said this in Psalms 49:5. Why should I fear when evil days come? You may have the opinion that evil days are here. Maybe you have the opinion that they're not. Either way, evil days will come in all of our lives. Why should I fear, they said, when wicked deceivers surround me? Are you afraid that somebody might be deceiving to the point where they're doing things that are going to affect the rest of your life? It could happen. And yet the sons of Korah, through inspiration, said, why should I fear, though when wicked deceivers surround me? The reaction to wicked deceivers is not fear. It's to live for God. I've got a couple more passages. We're at 38 minutes and I'm nearly done. I realize I've gone a little bit longer. Are we still Zooming and still Facebooking? I want to read this and we'll close with it. It's found in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 24. And it will tell us all the problems that fear causes, and then it will tell us the solution. Remember Proverbs 1:7? The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. But for those who refuse to listen, Proverbs 1:24. Since you rejected me when I called you, and no one gave heed when I stretched out my hand, since you ignored all my advice and would not accept my rebuke, I in turn will laugh at your disaster. I will mock when calamity overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster sweeps over you like a whirlwind and distress and trouble overwhelm you. Does that not describe some of the things that are going on now? And maybe some of the fears were some of the things we've been experiencing. Then they will call, but I'll not answer. They will look for me, but they won't find me, since they hated knowledge. What's the beginning of knowledge? The fear of the Lord. So he's saying they hated the fear of the Lord. Since they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. What do you have to look forward to if you choose not to fear the Lord? Calamity, distress, trouble, disaster. And then he goes on to say, since they would not accept my advice and spurn my rebuke, they will eat the fruit of their ways and be filled with the fruit of their schemes. For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. That's a nice little list, isn't it? Trouble, distress, calamity, disaster, death, and destruction. This is what God has reserved for those who choose not to fear him. But look at the very last verse of chapter 1. But whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm. Which will you choose? The invitation's open tonight. If you need to respond to the gospel's call, we'd encourage you to do that while we stand and sing.